Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Joyce Rosario. I'm the Associate Curator of PuSh International Performing Arts Festival. Welcome to Day 3 of PuSh 2016, and our event today, Indigenous Performance Reaches Critical Mass. I would like to first start by acknowledging that this event, our festival where we live and work, takes place on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish. I'm really happy that you all are here. We're actually going to be oriented in the round. I just happen to be standing by the screen for now. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I introduce Cole. I'd also like to thank the Indigenous Performing Arts Alliance and Full Circle. They've been so amazing to work with in putting this together, and it's been as a result of kind of an ongoing conversation, and it's great for PuSh to be a part of it, this festival. Little bits of housekeeping. There is a volunteer photographer taking photos of the event. I hope that's okay. If it's not, you can let her know, you can let me know, you can let Cole know. Washrooms, there's one just outside, and if that one's occupied, there's one kind of around. If you go out down the hall and you're first right, there's another set of washrooms. The microphones. So we have this one here that's going to be recording. There were a lot of people that said that they wanted to be here but couldn't, and so we've made arrangements to record, and we'll post that at some point. And then there's also a handheld for you guys to use, and that'll amplify the room. But it's at your discretion, I would say, for the speakers. I think that was all of my housekeeping and welcomes and stuff. I'm going to hand it over to Cole Alvis.
Xwməthkwəy, everyone, for being here today, and feel free to come in and out as we go. I'd like to begin by also acknowledging the First Peoples, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish peoples. My name's Cole Alvis. I'm proud of my Métis and Irish heritage from the Turtle Mountains in Manitoba, so it's great to be a guest here on this land. Indigenous performance reaches critical mass. Does it? Did it? Are we there? That's our provocation, and why we're here today. This is inspired largely through IPAA's collaboration with the National Arts Centre English Theatre and Deneh'Cho Storytellers. Deneh'Cho is a 30-plus-year organization doing work, Indigenous performance work, in community on Manitoulin Island in Ontario. So there was a big convergence of artistic leaders from across the country, 40 Indigenous performing artists and over 100 artistic leaders that all came in May of 2015 to discuss Indigenous performance. And so this event here is a way to bring the momentum of that rigorous conversation to communities. So it was great to have as many arrive at that place, but let's keep it rolling. And excellent to be invited by PuSh to demonstrate their allyship and to be facilitating the relationships with the peoples and the artists here. We'll see what my next slide is. Within critical mass, one of the ways that IPAA, an Indigenous Arts Service Organization, is attempting to reach that is through one of the outcomes of our collaboration with the NAC and Deneh'Cho, which is the Indigenous body of work. This is over 350 works listed, the artists and their works, to help dispel any concerns that Marie Clements and Thompson Highway and Drew Hayden Taylor are our only creators. There are many. There was a call to have the NAC wanted to know what is the canon of Indigenous theater, and rather than limiting it to a short list or highlights, this is attempting to collect all. And so if you scroll down on our website, there's an area where you can comment or add any artists that you don't see presently. And there's much work to do. It's, I will say, very theater focused presently, so not a lot of dance. And every work is either in English or Cree. So we have some work to do as far as being more comprehensive in this. Spacebar. One of the collaborations that we're doing to help with this front is to work with Spiderweb Show's online presence called Performance Wiki. And What this is a wiki where anyone can create posts or fill in details about these works. And so the ultimate goal is to take this impressive scroll that IPA has on our list and create hyperlinks to in specific pages. So who is that artist? When was that work premiered? How can I learn more and grapple with this body of work? So move ahead to Performance Wiki features this map. And so if you scroll on the right, there are other circles that it will show. But basically what this means is you can place yourself on the map, both as an artist, an organization, or as a work. So the spacebar again. The next one shows us the cheeky title, Here First, which is we were here first, so Indigenous performing artists who would like to self-identify. If you click on a pink dot, that person's profile will show up and you can learn about them. Similarly, if you scroll down on the right column, there's something called Story Origin, and also from the Indigenous body of work. And what I think is important about Story Origin is paying respects to where does this story come from. It's up to the person that places it, whether it's where the playwright lives, where they wrote the work, or in some cases, who is the community that has inspired this story. And so I think that's an important way of tracking and honoring the connection and following those protocols of respecting the place and the people when it comes to the story. And so I invite you to check out IPAA.ca, IPAA.ca, as well as Performance Wiki. If you have some knowledge and would like to create posts, we welcome that. And at this point, I will call our 4 Indigenous leaders to the circle.
Did you say 4? Oh, that's...
Yeah, everyone all together.
Oh,
It's a
my.
conversation. So please join us, Rachel.
Oh.
So a bit of a nod to the structure here. We're attempting to have a facilitated list conversation. So each of the 4 Indigenous leaders have prepared a provocation, which is also written in your programs. Margo Kane will begin. I'll ask them to introduce themselves. Feel free to use the mics if you'd like. And we will take a break. So we'll be in. We'll be witnessing the conversation for an hour, and then there's food, and we will come back for part 2. Briefly speaking about this structure, it is largely inspired from the ongoing collaboration with the National Art Center in Devage, where in conversations and explorations about Indigenous performance, Indigenous leaders are at the center. And it is their voices that we, as allies, will observe and witness, and be able to situate ourselves within the information that we glean. So, xwməthkwəy for joining us here, and we'll have Margo take it away to have everyone introduce themselves.
Good morning, I'm Margo Kane, Cree Soto from Alberta, but been here in Vancouver for too many years for me to remember, actually. Probably in the early 80s is really when I arrived, and came and went as I worked and toured, and discovered that it was a really great home base to have here on the edge of the Pacific Rim. And so I've stayed. Although my home territory is still in central northern Alberta. Primarily Edmonton was where I was raised, and a really great time I think. In the 50s, it was so much simpler in some ways, I would say. So I guess my critical mass. I suppose it's an easy way for me to begin because it discusses what is the history and the development of Aboriginal, Indigenous, Aboriginal Native performance and all of the creators that came to be part of these various movements in Canada. It also, I mean, I think because I was someone who was part of the earliest movements in this country, there are only a handful of people that are actually stayed in the theater and that I could see. in my age range. So some like Thompson Highway have created a body of work and have a an international reputation that it has grown and developed through the years. Others have become arts administrators and have built and developed a lot of connections to institutions and have had other experiences that put them in the background, but very important to the development and the continued development of the artists and the work. And then there were a lot of actors and writers and people who've created along the way that are part of this body of work that have, if not disappeared, they've transformed into doing other things, and not necessarily always in the arts, definitely. So when I think about my kind of, I think about critical mass, I have to think about the full history of my own self through Canada, trying to be an actor, be a creator, be a producer. I think of those many, many years where a number of people just slowly disappeared from the milieu. I also think what was very interesting is that a number of people have transformed into other things, other creative activities. So if you started in theater or as an actor, you didn't necessarily stay there, but a number of people have evolved into taken on other roles and are still engaged in some way, in some kind of creative venture, whether it's in their community or in a main city, a major city, or something like that. When I was a young actor, I was trained because of my desire to train as a dancer. I started as my basic training was as a dancer. I was naturally inspired by movement. I was colonized by the musical theater films, Busby Berkeley and what have you. So I enjoyed that's entertainment. I was raised and with those images. And then as a young woman, I was an eldest child, a young girl. I was an eldest child. So many of you heard me say this many times. I had a captive audience. I was the eldest child. I had my family and my extended family and my neighborhood to try and coerce into doing my little productions in the yard or in the tent that was put up in the backyard or in the field where we played next door to us, where we played kick the can. And I found that actually that was kind of natural to me. I was just a natural little producer, a natural make kind of things happen. And so I was very fortunate in many ways, because although I didn't go to university or a formal kind of training, like an actor training program like Studio 58 or something, I was always engaged in creating something. So I had a dance company when I was 11. There were 7 of us. It was called the 7-Up. Very creative. But it was I was living at a time when to play and to create things with yourselves and your neighbors and your friends and your brothers and your sisters was very much a part. And I was actually it was my teachers and other adults that actually encouraged me. Like, I didn't know that wasn't going to be my career or anything. It was just the natural inclination was to do that work, to create something, an event, a happening, a story, a show. And so I was nurtured by my teachers. I was nurtured by my the part of my community that that was not my immediate family, I have to say. my aunties, my uncles, those people a little bit farther removed who could see that and enjoyed that and encouraged that kind of development. So I started teaching dance when I was like 13, 14 to children, and it's sort of what was one of my greatest joys, actually, and I hope to return to that again. The notion that somehow I would pursue some kind of academic pathway to become an actor or a playwright or something like that was never entered my mind. It was just a natural progression of being creative and producing things and being encouraged, and other people finding little moments for me to produce and manage the teen dance and the community league. You know, I would have never thought of that myself. It's just that people saw the energy that I had and the creativity, and they encouraged that. So I have to say that that was primarily a non-native community. Primarily, I say, because I was separated from my family as a child. And although my family kept coming to visit me as I was adopted out, they kept trying to adopt me back in. So there was this very interesting play that has happened in my life where I'm always in between. I'm always moving from back and forth. And I have lots of family that are from many cultures, and as well as my own Indigenous culture, who mean a lot to me, and who I meant a lot to them. I think that's probably when I think about, okay, well, just as a person, how do you then achieve what you need to achieve? Like, as a community, or as a small community of artists and creators in the community, how is it that you achieve so-called critical mass? What is that path? And for me, the resonance is always that you're encouraged by others, sometimes when you don't know yourself. And you also have the freedom, and I did have the freedom. That's why I say I was raised in the 50s. I had an incredible amount of freedom that maybe people don't have that same kind of freedom today. They have a different kind of freedom, I guess. But I really value that. I value that space and time that I had to just express myself. Or as my friend says, express myself, because I have a lot of things that I like to do, and a lot of different ways that I feel I need to use my full self, and become, what did they say, a whole person. That was sort of one of those philosophies that came in sometime in the 70s about being a whole person. How do you do that? How do you use all of yourself and develop all the parts of yourself, your physical, your emotional, your spiritual, your mental? How do you take a holistic approach to your own development? So I was privileged in a way to have lots of love in my life. Even though I had lots of chaos, I also had lots of love with all these different peoples, and wanting to support me or wanting to encourage me. But I have to say, in my I moved from dance to, in high school, theater and music, singing, and I had lots of great things that happened. But it was all in, Western theatrical forms. I had a great time. But I was, as it turned out, it looked like as an actor, I was going to be left playing all the artists, all the actors of color in all the scripts that were being produced. Primarily, of course, at that time in my 70s, 80s, 90s, very little Canadian work, mostly British and American work on the stages. So I sort of I looked at what was possible. I did a lot of early, choreography for little town musicals. Alberta, they had a big thing, and they threw money at all these small towns to develop their own story of their town for probably some centennial project or something. So I because I knew the actors and young directors that, the theater community, I got to be part of some of those really fun kind of experiences. But when I started to look seriously at the work that was on the stages, there was one play, The Ecstasy of Rita Jo. And I tried very desperately to get that role because it was coming, the new Chapter stage was opening. The Citadel Theatre had built a big, huge, beautiful building, and they had a new director. He was British. Coming, and his associate happened to be my high school drama club colleague, and I was hoping that I would get The Ecstasy of Rita Jo. Now, I was pretty young out of my theater training. I trained as a dancer. I'd been a dancer with the Alberta Contemporary Dance Theatre. I'd done all kinds of things. I'd worked. I was hoping to get on the stage with this big show, and of course I was the understudy for a white actress married to the associate director from Texas. So, I did get a small role in the play, and I had the final words in the play. I played her sister, Eileen Jo. When Rita Jo first come to the city, she told me the cement made her feet hurt. And that was my closing of the play. And it was a marvelous experience, despite the challenge, but I have to say that from the next several years, there was no work for me unless I was to play an actor of color, I was to play a Spanish role, or I was to play some other role, small role, in the canon of theater that was being presented in Canada. So what hope was there for me if I couldn't even get the Aboriginal show that was coming? What hope was there for me if there was no other work? So I started to really reconsider what I was doing as an actor. I wanted our own stories to be on the stages. And so I began to create my own and begin to try and devise my own work. And that has led eventually to one of my solo shows that I toured for over 10 years, called Moon Lodge. Because it meant it was a way for me to perfect my way of creating a work, to telling our own story. It's about a child who's scooped, all the children that we have are taken from, Aboriginal children taken from their families by children aid societies and all the rest of that, the government. So it was a story. It was a story that I could carry in a suitcase. I carry the show in a suitcase, and I was able to perfect my craft. I was able to learn how to, do the show in various stages, in various communities, big stages. It was lovely to be at the Dreaming Festival in Sydney, at the Opera House in the Playhouse, with all the other women's business, all the other Aboriginal women's solo shows in Sydney. So there was lots of travel and lots of experience that came with me being able to share that story and to also carry that story as a creator myself, and as a way for me to learn more about how to present myself on all kinds of stages, and how to and see the world, and get to meet and see all kinds of incredible work in all these different festivals. I think that I was fortunate that I could do that. When I look at the body of work, and as I've been part of these conversations, looking at all the work that Indigenous artists have created through all these years, not many of them got a second production. And so for me, I say, I don't know what it's going to take. I formed the company Full Circle to bring us together. I actually formed it to bring my family together, as a way for me to feel like we're working together towards something together. And I think that it's been, the company's 23 years old now, and I still am now, I'm just finding other Aboriginal artists and people who can actually help carry it with me. So critical mass, oh my God, like I haven't even begun to do what I want to do creatively, right? I'm trying to hold together all these years, just to have the capacity to put on a festival every year so that everybody else can have a stage that needs a stage. That's all I'm doing. I'm not creating new work. I can't. It's set to the side. I can't even reach critical mass in my own work. I can't even get there because I'm still trying to hold together and pull together the community and provide the opportunity and the funding and educate the funders and try and reach out and all of that, doing all these things to try and keep us together so that we can build together, so that we can, have second productions of things, so that we can encourage new people to develop work, and that we can offer them the connections to other festivals and other things that are happening in the world, in the country, in the city, to bring us all together and to offer opportunities for our people to share our stories. So no, we do not have critical mass. These stories, it's a challenge too, because I understand that people, they only, I don't mean to sound harsh, but they first of all, they only care about themselves and the people dear to them. In this Western way of living in the world, we're kind of separated from each other by what? By our worldview. I mean, like for me, my community is quite huge, I want you all to feel part of that. I want to encourage that development so we can see your work, and so we can see it produced, and so we can see it toured, and we can see that other non-native companies and institutions take our stories seriously. We're part of the history of this land, and we are not still, our work is still not shared on the stages of this country. So critical mass is yet to come. I feel a bit responsible because I don't create a season of work like other people, because I can't. I couldn't. There weren't enough resources. It may come, but I feel a bit like that. If we showcase some of those works on that list with you on the stages in this country, that would go a lot farther towards critical mass, achieving that. So I feel a bit like it's still a goal. I'm not hopeless about it all. I have to say I am probably entering a part of my life where I feel buoyant, which is really shocking to me. I had some pretty serious shit happen to me this year, and I just kind of bounced up. And some of it is just, I think we're at a point in history now where we're all starting to talk together in a better way and more fully. I mean, I know we still have our challenges together, but we need to talk and we need to share. And that's the big word for me, it's share. We need to share the resources, and we need to share with each other, and we need to make sure that this body of work and these Aboriginal voices are being seen. I think I'll just stop there. Lindsay.
So are we gonna all respond to this, or do we pass on?
I think you can respond within the context of your publication.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's always such a pleasure to hear you speak and tell stories. I'm like, It's so great. Ani, hello, my name is Lindsay Lachance. I'm Acknowledgement from Ottawa area, and I'm a PhD student here at UBC, so I've been a guest on Coast Salish Territories for about 2.5 years. And I'm really excited and happy to be here and have this conversation with you guys today. So I think that, from what you said, I'm like, I love listening to, but I also think that you speak so truly, and what you say is really important, especially in this situation of, are we reaching critical mass? I don't think so either. Mm-hmm. And I approach that from a scholarly perspective, or from the institution, to say that how am I supposed to build a PhD, build a methodology, build an introduction to a PhD thesis without this critical work that's been done. So the resources I have to work from talk about Indigenous performance as hybridity, talks about Indigenous performance as always stemming from the British director, always stemming from someone else's work. And I think in some ways that's really problematic for people who are seeing the shows and trying to access whatever is being produced, because they're unable to understand that creators are coming from experiences, they're coming from expressing selves. So everything that is within the body of making is kind of being derailed by notions of hybridity, or always saying, this was Brechtian theater with Indigenous characters. This was Shakespeare with First Nations actors. And, really that's not at all what we're making. And so that kind of brings me into this idea of Indigenous dramaturgies and Indigenous dramaturgical structures, because I think it's important to look at how, why, where, when the works are being made. So dramaturgy, that word was taught to me through university, coming from a German playwright, theoretician Lessing, who kind of coined that term in looking at the ways in which plays are made, and then that sort of process that manifests in performance, or that's what I take from dramaturgy. Focusing on certain content issues, whether it's play, character development, plot development, and watching that structure process manifest in performance. And that's how I interpret that trickster word, dramaturgy, especially within Indigenous dramaturgical structures. So looking at functions, looking at where, when, how people are making and creating, and how that manifests within performance. So when people ask me, hey, love, what are you doing? What are you writing your PhD on? I say, Indigenous dramaturgical structures. People literally say two responses, like the smile, like, oh, okay, and leave, or I have no idea what you're saying. So to me, again, I'm reminded that this is not reaching critical mass, because I always end up, feeling shy or having to cringe a little bit to be like, we're not going to be able to have this conversation, or I have to explain, not nearly as well as what you have, but like kind of this sort of history of where we're coming from. And so I think that it's really important for us, as you say, to share within ourselves and to work on our community before trying to feel like we've made it to critical mass. Because if we don't have the tools to understand how we're working, why we're working, and how we do that together, then I don't think that mainstream Canadian audiences have the tools to understand the work that's being made. And so it's really great for me to see that Indigenous Performing Arts Alliance is making this list of works that's being done, that's really trying to create an interactive way for people to see who's making, where they're making, how and why they're making. I think that's process. I think that's something that's lacking from the side of the people who are not just the makers. So you guys are making, you're doing a lot of work, you're putting your voices and yourself out there. So how can we in turn share the resources that we might have as to how to help that reach ourselves, and then consider how it can reach outwards. So I guess I'm interested in posing questions of new play development and ways of process that you guys have come across within your making. And I think of works like Monique Mahika talks a lot about embodied politics, or talks about how her work comes from experience, and that's just what you've shared with us as well. So I'm really interested in thinking about, like Moon Lodge has come from your embodied experiences, has come from your life, so it has these social, historical, political starting points and stemming points, and then it's translated through your body. And so I think that, a suggestion I would have in a way to reach critical mass, or for us to share within our communities of making, would be to really advocate that the work that's being done is resurgence. It's embodied politics. It has all of this power that we need to share and explain it as that way. So this is an artistic embodied politic because it comes from the Indigenous body, because it's made as an act of resurgence, because it's a different form of creation that definitely separates itself from other Canadian theater practices. So, I'm really interested in being like, this is how we do it. Like, yeah, let's bring the activism part out of it, because I think it's important, and I think that this artistic and political side of contemporary Indigenous theater right now is about being political. It's about embodiment, and so I think it's really a way that we can think about being critical within ourselves, and also how to perpetuate and move that forward. So if we continue to think that there's ways to to create and share what we're doing critically within ourselves, it's through this way of talking about the work as resurgence, as political agency, as artistic sovereignty, because it's peoples coming together to make and to create. So maybe I'm rambling a bit now because I get hyper of words like artistic sovereignty. But I will pose a question to you guys, because I know that you're great makers, and so I'm interested then to think about how you would feel or respond to these sorts of ideas of dramaturgy, a process of making, creating, working together, rehearsal process, production processes that identify these starting points or these ways of working as Indigenous structures. So why they would be inherently different from, my anger of seeing works being called as hybridity. So now is a chance to kind of be like, actually the work we do is based off of, cosmology, worldviews, teachings, connections with knowledges, with stories, and the knowledge that we hold in our bodies that carry and come with us every day, every step, every moment. That comes into our form of making. That's an embodied artistic politic, and I'm just wondering if maybe we could all kind of speak to how that translates with us and through us in our instances of making or rehearsal or collaboration.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Maza. I'm Meriam Yidinji woman from top northeast Queensland in Australia. I'm also Dutch on my mother's side, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded territory. I love how you guys say that. I've so taken that home. Got that as my little byline under my email now. Unceded territory. That's awesome. Yeah, unceded territory of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh. Yeah, absolute awesome honour to be here on this incredible country. Wow, this is such an awesome conversation. This is so awesome. The kind of hybridity that you talk about, anyway, new words for me. Certainly the way that I like to think about our we as artists, you know, I'm very aware that I went through a kind of traditional Western acting course and learnt, and that theatre is historically, obviously, a Western form, a tool, and that's all it is. It's a tool that we use. So like we pick up and have evolved, we're an incredibly Aboriginal people and First Nations people of the world are incredibly adaptive, and we have mastered the tools of our colonisers masterfully. You know, how well we mastered the guitar or the violin or theatre or dance. So for me, the way I like to reframe it is that I'm happy to take on these tools to be able to then tell my stories in my way. So the ways of working. So for me, the integrity or the integrity of the process is that I'm coming from that place. So I bring to the process that is embedded in the way in what comes into the room at the very beginning of the process, and the way. I mean, I suppose when you're talking about hybridity, like where the work is referenced or framed around Shakespeare or Brecht or these Western art forms, I mean, that's valid too. It's probably not work I'm interested in making, but I can see that that in itself is an art form. How you are able to reference someone else's stories and parallel them with your own, to speak to that audience. I can see that there's reference to that. So, yeah, in regards to your provocation, that for me is what is critical to that is that we need to, as artists, be super conscious, because we are all products of our society and our way of thinking. We've been brainwashed, we've been colonised, and we need to decolonise our brains as artists in terms of freeing ourselves. To be able to take the tools, to master the tools, but then make it your own in how you work. I'm just jumping back to your provocation. You know, this idea of, I don't quite actually understand the term. Have we reached critical mass? I mean, that seems so kind of crazy, and so far off in the distance somewhere. I'm thinking back to certainly in Australia, modern black theatre was born out of a kind of incredible energy that happened around the late 60s, 70s, pretty much around the world as I gauge it. There was a lot of kind of upheaval. Society was really kind of questioning itself in terms of, well, everything: sexual revolution, feminism, black power, Indigenous mobs, First Nations mobs, land rights, all these kind of, it was amazing. It was a phenomenal time in our world history, and there was a kind of that freedom you talked about, and it was easier, was that it didn't exist yet. So there was a freedom to create it from nothing because it didn't exist yet. So I can really relate to it, that freedom in that way. So we kind of now have a legacy going, the work that's happened from then till now. And there's been a phenomenal breaking down of walls and kicking in doors and waiting and picking away slowly at this big granite rock mountain. And where we are still a long way from anywhere, from this kind of idea of having critical mass is certainly from my perspective, we are so far from having a healthy ecology. I often think of my veggie garden. You don't water it, you don't, fertilise the soil, and you're not out there on a daily basis weeding. I mean, it goes to, your garden dies. And it's so hard in this industry to maintain a momentum when it's constantly, I mean, imagine if you only watered your garden every 3 months. I mean, every time you come to it, it's dead again. You've got to start again. And it feels often like that. It's very, how artists, the ones who stay in the career seriously need to be applauded. It is a very difficult industry to survive in. How anyone sticks it out is to their credit. So, the people who have stuck it out.
I'm crazy.
It's not about money and a damn thing funny. Yeah. And it's not about fame. It's not about any of those things that you'd expect would keep you going. I mean, obviously, it's about much more than that. It's because it's important. Like to hear and be reminded of your incredible dedication and commitment to being able to create a platform, a space, a culturally safe space for mob to, your people. Someone pulled me up last time I was here and they said, so when you use the term mob, what do you actually mean by that? Like gangsters? No! Oh my God, no. Mob is your people, your gang, yeah. But I mean, I really know that it takes blood, sweat and tears, love, passion, courage to keep going and to be able to stand there and say, okay, 25 years I've been at this, how come I'm still here? Why am I still here? And to still smile and to be optimistic. All credit to you. Whoa. It's because it's not easy, I know. And and I suppose my main, I think about myself, it's like absolutely you're driven by this knowledge, this thing that drives us is that these stories need to be told for our future of this planet. The planet is out of balance, and the stories of our First Peoples, of the land that we all live on in every nation, those stories need to be told. These stories certainly have, I just went to your museum, I can't remember how, these stories that go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The stories that go back, and certainly in my country, 80,000 years. I love saying that Australia is the longest continuous living culture on this planet. And we were using tools and were a sophisticated people while all you mob were still cavemen. I love just throwing that in. And then interesting, how we use the word civilized. Like we were civilized a long time ago. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Pass it on.
Great. Yeah. So, my name is Deneh'Cho. I'd like to thank Cole and Joyce and Norman and PuSh and IPAA for bringing together these fantastic people, and thank you guys for your words. And it's so exciting to be here on these territories, living, working, having these conversations, and I can't wait to continue all of this into the distant future. I think I want to talk a little bit about this dramaturgical structures idea. Something that rang true for me, and you mentioned Monique Makika, of the embodied politics. And one question that I grapple with often is what, as an Indigenous theater maker, is different from non-Indigenous theater makers. And this embodied politic, one of the things that I do in my work is I work from my experience, and it's a really interesting challenge because I'm not a holder of stories or songs or things like this, but I, even walking into the office with Margo, whom I work with, there's immediately a knowledge and a cultural protocol that is apparent, but it's not something that I can articulate necessarily. And I think that's true for a lot of Indigenous people in the world, in a retaking to culture and embodying these politics and these conversations that are internal and creating work from there. And I think that's one thing that is different from a lot of mainstream work. I think it's probably true in a lot of other realms, but mainstream work, I don't think it necessarily comes from that same place of really truly embodying yourself and changing that into the art. And that's not an absolute statement, that's a generalization, I'm sure. Oh shoot, where was the next thought? But okay, so, and something Lindsay and we had a conversation yesterday about something unrelated, but another question that kind of comes up for me in a lot of my work is, what do we know that is different, that is in our stories? And a lot of our worldviews and a lot of our teachings and a lot of these things, these are unique to us, and they're not only unique to us, they're unique to the territory we're working on, and their history is here as opposed to in distant places. And whether or not you have the knowledge of the stories, you still in some way have that connection, or alternatively have the opportunity to explore that lack of connection. The ignorance is a really interesting point of view for me, because of a colonial history that I'm sure we're all familiar with to some degree. A lot of attempted erasure of knowledge happened, and so returning to that knowledge as some part of the artist's journey is an interesting part of what I would call a dramaturgical structure that is not uniquely Indigenous, but is an Indigenous reality in our dramaturgical view of our work. And I think it's really lovely that Margo tells this wonderful story of her arriving here, and it starts with her being a child and playing in a backyard with her community, right? We are looking really, as Lindsay says, internally to ourselves and to our communities first in a lot of these works, to grapple with these histories, these stories, and bring them to our communities so that we can work through some of it with our communities, and then out into the rest of the world so that we can continue the work that we have as nations and countries, and I use that as two different terms in this context, to further these conversations. And something that comes up through all of this, we have this lovely history that Margo's told us, and so we have some sense of where we've been. And a question that I'm interested in now is where are we? I don't think it's very clear to me. I think a lot is happening very quickly right now that is very positive, and we get to have these wonderful people come and visit us, and we have tumultuous things happening in our country, and then that opens to the impossible question of where are we going, which I don't think is worth trying to answer. But where are we now? That's I think not critical mass is being reached, but a momentum. There's certainly a momentum that's happening, and Margo's seeing it in the support that she's receiving in her company now. She's seeing the possibility of going back to being Margo Kane the artist, right? And that's the dream, right? But that indicates for me a really, really big shift from when First Circle was formed and Margo was the Indigenous artist on the West Coast in some way, right? Like, and that community building has certainly been significant in that. So maybe what I would propose in the context of dramaturgical structures and our work and how we create work, where are we? What's going on for us now?
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting to have seen a development in shows that are being produced. And I think about, for example, Peter Hinton being at the National Arts Center. So to me that was a shift and a change, because there were shows that were touring, there were shows that were being brought to the NAC, I was going with family. I was also going with school. Then we were talking about that in school. And that's where I realized that there is no critical mass because no one has the tools to be able to talk about the changes that are happening. So for me, where are we now is also, I'm also hopeful because I'm approaching this from, again, like a academic section. So I'm able to be a part of a very proud and thriving program at UBC where Indigenous scholars are writing for themselves, are creating critical theory. And I think that's, something that I'm trying to do as well, to help provide tools or allow for conversations for people to access the work that is being done. So, that is where we're at now for me, is to try and help find ways to have conversations with people about the work that is being done, because we do have a lot more new play development, because we have resources like Full Circle and Native Earth Performing Arts that are trying to help get our stories out and that are trying to have Indigenous practitioners create and make their own works. I think that what's important now is that we keep the momentum going and we love and support each other in the making process, but also that we help create conversations after. Mm-hmm. What was this? What did we just see? How do we come to make this? Talk more about whether it's an autobiographical piece and kind of why it's important for us to think, this way of making is inherently different because I have my 7 generations behind me and I'm looking 7 generations after me. And I think that that's the starting point of Indigenous dramaturgies for me and structures, is that as you said, it is different, it's inherently different because we're able to start from a non-Aristotelian lineage. We're able to start from within self, and the self is never alone because of what's behind us and what's coming after us. And so I think that starting point and that way of looking at art or embodiment is important, because we are making theater in the English language, but it's different because of where we've come from in our stories and the relationships that we take after every conversation or after every experience. Mm-hmm. So for me, the spirit world is always a part of everything I do, which includes making. So as an artistic practitioner, that to me is what distinguishes Indigenous dramaturgical structures, because of the inherent differences in knowledges and spirituality and in cosmology and ways of being in relationship to self, others, and the land in which you work.
I'm interested to bring this back to something that came up when Rachel was speaking about. Lindsay mentioned how we're often referred to as Brecht with Indigenous performers, Shakespeare exactly. But I think it's really interesting in this context, Rachel bringing up the fact that a lot of this is tools, right? And so the difference between being referenced by Western theater practices or using Western theater practices to further our own ways of making, or our own creation.
Mm-hmm. And that is a very useful distinction, because you're claiming that, and it is about claiming space. So that is the importance, I think, of continuing and perpetuating our communities to work together and to come together to work, is to claim space. And so claiming to use these tools is great. And that's an argument or another differentiation between other ways of making is, I'm going to claim space, I'm going to claim this tool, and I'm going to use this instead of having to alter ways of working or try and be like, yeah, maybe it is a little bit of a Brecht show. No, and so I think that's important too, just again coming from the academic side where you always have to prove and articulate and argue why you're doing something. Is helpful to think about taking
It's
the
just so
tools.
incredible hearing. I'm so aware that, you know, that this is a journey. I'm very aware that I'm on a journey. I haven't got all the answers. I haven't worked out, you know, and I'm kind of actually ever aware of this sense of actually an excitement and anticipation of actually what's the theatre we're going to be making as we step into this space stronger, more strongly. And I'm so aware that I work definitely not academically. Like that is, I'm not thinking or rationalising or articulating intelligently why I'm doing what I'm doing, but I'm working very intuitively. I work extremely following my gut. And if I think about, and it's interesting the way you're talking now makes me think that's actually absolutely what I'm doing. So I, for instance, every work we make, I don't know where it's going to go. There's no. I mean, this is definitely a conscious choice to not be kind of caught within the Western framework. I'm aware that those frames and these tools, but I'm very very loyal and hyper alert to what the centre of the story is, and allowing that to drive the process. So what the story will be, what shape it will take, and what form it'll take, and everything, how long it'll be, who will be, what art forms need to, you know, how it will shape, how it will manifest, is absolutely driven by the centre of that, the keeper of that story. So whether it's a solo story of Jack Charles's story, or a community story like another show we've done called Beautiful One Day, which was with a community, based on an Aboriginal community outside of in Queensland called Palm Island. So that there was a story that belonged to that community. So I'm very aware of being trusting that, and that's without being able to articulate it. It's about absolutely letting, that the integrity and the truth of that person with all of that, their story, their community, where they belong, their connection to their country, to their spirit, comes with that and drives that process, and is the centre and most important thing in that room as the work is kind of, and then the rest of us are serving it, is always the feeling. I always feel like I'm on the ride. I'm jumping on someone's ride. Yeah. But it's, I really get how important it is that we're able to talk about it. So keep going.
I think when I finally was creating Moon Lodge, I'd already created a certain amount of work that I toured in the communities that were outside or in the community hall or wherever, in the school gym or wherever, and I would transform that performance to suit the environment that I was in. So I was working very much from the story or the teachings that I had, that I needed to share, and I would, it was very much embodiment, what I did. It's why Moon Lodge has never been, it's only going to be produced in a workshop by somebody else this February, next month. Like it's not like I belong to the theatre community. Oh, I did a play, now and I'll publish it, now everybody else can produce it. It was never that kind of work. It was very personal. It was very much my, something that I labored on for many years. Oh, I didn't write it and it was finished. No, every time I did it, I had to reconnect and find where I was at that moment in telling that story, and therefore I had to do to tweak the performance. Never mind tweak it so that it would suit the venue or lack of venue that I was in. So the earlier work was much more exploratory, it was outside. It took in the fact that the community I was in would offer things to me. They'd offer songs, they'd offer teachings, they'd offer stuff. And then the performance, the story was, at the heart of it was still the same, but the way it was told had some additional things that came in from that community. And I'm very excited about being able to discuss and talk about this with our own community. Because it's one thing to, I'm not trained in theater history or anything else, so I've seen a lot of work throughout my years, but I'm not, I've always tried to not take on another teaching from a world theater perspective, because one, it's not my priority, so I don't have time. I'm interested, but I'm not that interested because there's so many other priorities, and I really move from the intuitive and from the story that I think that is trying to be told. And maybe I've decided that I'm going to tell that story, but I also feel very much that the spirit world is very much a part of what I do, what we do, because of partly because it's so damn strong. You can walk away, but you can't ever leave. You know, your ancestors are with you and they find you and they find ways to connect to you. And even if you ignore them, you know, or even if you're too busy working on things and you forget that they're there, you know, they come and they remind you, and you're reminded always that this is a part, that you are part of a legacy. I love that word. But you're also, we're also, dare I say, we are the stewards of this earth. And we have incredible responsibilities that we tend to forget sometimes because we're busy doing our thing. We tend to not understand our place in the ecology of this country and of this land. And yes, there are people in our societies, in our tribal societies, whose job it is to remind us, and whose job it is to keep those stories, and it's whose job it is to share those ceremonies when it's appropriate, and to share those stories when it's appropriate. There are people whose job it is, but we've lost some of those people. And it may come to us that we need to be part of sharing those stories in some fashion. So I'm really, I feel that we're coming to a time when we can really start to articulate together what it is we've been experiencing, what it is we're trying to do, where it is we see our places in developing a body of Aboriginal work that's going to be heard by not just us. That's important. We need to do this for our people, the survival of our young people. I mean, I just saw another news report last night about the incredible suicides in Northern Ontario. I just about lost it because I am carrying the memory of leaving some of those youth when I did youth work with them in Northern Ontario, and I know that it's so very close to survival of just our people. Never mind, the development of art and stories to share. You know, we're still dealing with survival issues in our communities, and the stakes are very, very high. And that is something that I don't think Western art makers have the same, generally speaking, have the same connection to. Their survival is not at stake. Our people's are. So with that, I want you to share a little bit about your provocation, because I believe this very strongly. That as we're coming into our own, and we're finding allies to work with, because we all need each other, and because really, I mean, I really miss my theater people. I'm sorry, I wish you all were closer to me all the time, but it's been a very lonely road. And now I'm at a point where I say, okay, well, now I can see there are more people interested in helping and working together and all of that. But we really need to be the drivers of that, of what's going to happen in Canada. Let's start there, in our communities, around how is our work shared with the community. I don't want just a play to be produced on some Western stage, and then a few calls go out to, you know, the Friendship Center or whomever to get a few Aboriginal audience members in. I'm interested in that work making a difference in our people's lives. So I'm interested in, are they involved in the conversation about, do you want this work to be presented in your community? How would you like to be engaged with the theater? Who might you like to bring to the show? So that they are really part of defining how it is that work is going to be shared with our people and the non-native community that will naturally come to the theater or be interested to be part. Like, our people need to be honored that way. That's their stories, you know. They don't have the opportunity. They don't have the access. They don't have the courage. They don't have maybe they don't have the interest sometimes because they don't know what's possible. I mean, that's part of that sharing of power and privilege, to say, look, we can help, we can share, we can be part of this, but our people need to be equal partners in developing that event or that production or all the ancillary events that happen around that, so that we have some power.
So we'll just take a reprieve here on this incredible note about cross-cultural collaboration and the sharing of the power and the decision making. This is incredible. Thank you everyone for what you've said so far.